Hello and welcome to today's podcast from Indian Libertarians. And today we'll be discussing the concept or the philosophy of libertarianism. And today I have with me the co-founder of Indian Libertarians, Mithun Datta. And today he will be describing and explaining what libertarianism is. So, Mithun, to start off with, can we have a quick definition, a brief definition of what libertarianism is?
Hi, hello everyone. I hope you all are doing good. Libertarianism, basically, there are two definitions which goes in. First is the metaphysical aspect, which talks about the free will, which is against determinist views, where determinists believe that everything is governed by nature and human beings do not have free will. Libertarianism is about free will, that the individual has a free choice and he can choose his actions, he is aware of his consequences. So that is the first definition of libertarianism, metaphysical. In history, we know that it started off with the classical liberal school, and then the various classical liberals and philosophers they started describing this free will theory and how it is applicable to the economics, or how it deals with the human society, and why it is beneficial for them. During the French Revolution, the term libertarianism and libertarian came into existence from their word. I think it was liberal, libertine or something. Sorry, I cannot recall. I am unable to recall that word properly. So at that point of time, it became a political theory. Like it was used to talk about the policies of the state, the monarchs, and how they affect the free will and the freedom of the people, and why it is unjust. So thereupon, the philosopher started describing like what should be the freedom of the individual and how it will be related to the regulations which are imposed by the government on and the and curbing the freedom of the citizens and the individuals by their rules and laws. So what will the libertarianism, basically thereafter the philosophers initially this was this term was used by the left libertarians, the anarchist. Later on, the right libertarians, the Rothbardian, they took up this word, and you had Rothbard, then Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman, and other libertarians from the right wing who started taking using this word to describe their philosophy. So that is basically the what libertarianism is all about now. Today we know it as with respect to what the state is doing, what the individual rights should be, and about market economics as well. There.
Yeah, method. So, okay, that's the sort of quick run through history as to how the term comes about
Yeah.
in today's world. That's fine. Uh, but since this philosophy has a rich history, right? Rich history and a deep background, a lot of terms, uh, deep semantics, on which is used in this philosophy. I think the people would want to know: is this a specific ideology, or is it a philosophy? So, does it, for example, have set of principles? Is there something that we can look at and read and say, yes, this is libertarianism, and then we can use that as the foundation and then evaluate if someone is or is not a libertarian?
Yeah, of course. Like as I said, libertarianism, the word came through, or the entire discussion or the debate started with the classical liberals, and this had to deal with the individual's right? So, a libertarian is somebody who basically believes in self-ownership and the non-aggression principle, that violence is bad. You should not, violence is bad. You should not aggress upon other people. You should not violate other people's rights. And it also tries to define the scope of your rights, right? Like how much free will can you actually how much free will, how many actions can you do out of your free will, and where your free will, the actions out of your free will ends. Like you cannot murder somebody, you cannot steal other people's property. So basically, a libertarian, a pure or a very a strong libertarian or libertarian theory, which we have come to conclusion, or the majority agreement is that aggression is bad. So there is a principle called as the non-aggression principle, or the non-aggression axiom, as most people say. It's a moral stand. It's a deontological concept. It is essential that we understand, human beings need to have control over certain property, right? They should have self ownership. Other, if they don't have self ownership, then they are as good as slaves, right? They are dominated by some other people. So yeah, so the non-aggression principle is the first thing which comes up as a derivation of the self-ownership. So everything actually is derived out of self-ownership. Like every individual owns their own body. Every individual is unique in their own skills. So they have the power. They naturally own their body, right? So they do not have an unlimited supply of their body. Their lifespan is limited. So each and every individual must be given the right to execute his exercises all his free will and the entire power that he has to execute, like whatever can be done with his body. So that exclusive right should be given to his body. Now his body is also used to, he is going to spend his time, his lifetime, and his labor to create goods. So those goods he has an ownership because he is the one who has created it. So the self-ownership principle comes over here, right? When one person is aggressing or stealing somebody else's property, he is actually stealing his labor, the time, and the fruit what he has out of his free will had decided to commit to, like I'm going to transform this natural resources into this particular goods for my satisfaction or for the satisfaction of other people. So he had made that decision, and now there is somebody else who did not decide to do, or he did not make any kind of transformation. He did not innovate. He did not uh, perform the labor which is required to transform this good, but now has come and wants to gain control over this goods. So we say that we take a moral stand that this thing is not good. It is bad. It's an aggression, and we should not tolerate this kind of actions by individuals who are denying the individual right and property rights of other people. So everything basically starts from the free will, the self determination, and the self ownership of the people. So a libertarian, basically, he opposes the denial of anyone, opposes any idea which denies the individual his ownership, self ownership, self determination, and the right to execute his free will until and unless he is not imposing his will upon somebody else. So that is what the libertarian, pure libertarians are. The problem is that there are certain strains of libertarians who believe that certain restrictions should be uh, put put on individuals' free will, even if it's not imposing their will on other people. Like for some victimless crime where you make a racial comment, or you do not pay your taxes or something like that, where they say that these things are bad for the human society. And that is one way, that is one reason that they keep opposing it. The second thing is that there are certain libertarians who believe in social justice, where if one person gives up his right, but if by giving up his rights on his ownership, he actually, that is going to benefit a lot many other people. So they come up with here we should, with some social contract theory, where social justice theory, where they say that we should not allow a certain individual to do certain things. So that is what libertarian concept and the principles are.
So, just to recap and clarify, So libertarianism essentially has one core principle. There is the non-aggression principle, which states that it is not justified to initiate force or aggress against persons or persons' property.
Correct.
And it is only justified in case of self-defense.
Right.
And also, this includes, I would say, to a certain extent, threat, right? So, if an individual does recognize that there is not just the actual act of aggression, but there's a threat of the aggression, that individual is justified in defending himself or herself. So, besides this, there's nothing else that defines libertarianism, which we now call it thin libertarianism.
Correct.
And of course, the other side of the coin of this NAP would be property rights, because without property rights, you'll not be able to define and identify aggression as to who's the aggressor and who's the victim.
Right.
As you rightly brought up, there are people, academic institutions, and policy think tanks and whatnot, who are trying to redefine libertarianism, in fact, trying to add to it, saying that non aggression principle is not sufficient to complete this philosophy, it is incomplete. So they try to add the dimension of social justice, which means that you need to look into things like supporting worker unions, minimum wage laws, anti-discrimination laws, affirmative action, and things like that. But the truth of the matter is that libertarianism is by itself complete. If you just look at the core principle and if you look at the application of it, there is no real need to add anything to it. Of course, there is a realm of application of libertarianism itself, where we go into ethics, legal theory, and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think it is quite clear that since we already have plenty of scholars and so many libertarians trying to apply this into ethics, morality, economics, and so many other diverse fields, that this actually has grown into a really rich philosophy, and trying to add to it things like social justice, I think will only dilute it. And in fact, there are some people, I guess this is from the Cato Institute, I think one of the writers on the Cato Institute wrote an essay last year which said that uh, libertarians should reject the non-aggression principle. And he had some six reasons for it. Of course, David Gordon from Mises Institute has replied to it, and there are others who replied to it as well. And rejecting the non-aggression principle as not being sufficient is like rejecting the idea of class struggle by Marxists. So I think it's kind of ridiculous that people would want to redefine a rich philosophy which has strict definitions, and trying to make it and convert it and mold it into something which it is not. So rejecting the NAP as being not sufficient would mean rejecting the complete body of libertarianism. So anyone who basically says that NAP, the non-aggression principle, and property rights is not sufficient to have a more free and prosperous and more equal society is not a libertarian. I think that is quite clear now, and I think we can uh, go a little more into details, right? So, for example, what is self-ownership, and how does it come about?
Self-ownership is basically it comes up naturally, right? You naturally own your body. So it's an axiom because we make a counter argument that if you are not the owner of your body, then who is the owner of your body? Which means that you are the person who is in control of your body. Like you can move your hands, you can make, you can think, you have a a vision of the reality which is very subjective to you. You value different things subjectively. You have your own principles. You have your own skill set to transform, to innovate, to take decisions. So basically, self ownership is the first natural homesteading that happens. What libertarians also work with, or mostly what we use, are the natural right theory, the moral or the natural right theory. So natural right theory is first, like as I said, the first thing which you come to own naturally is your life, right, and your body. So until and unless until the point you are living, and you have an ownership towards your body, and your body also has a will, right? It comes with a metaphysical concept called as the will, the self ownership concept, the self concept. So the self makes choices and your body acts according to those choices, right? So that is where the self ownership comes in. So natural rights theory is like when you're transforming something, you're mixing your labor. That is that you're spending a amount of your life span on doing that labor. In doing that in that process, you're also sacrificing your body's health. Your body gets deteriorated as more labor you put in. So these things comes into picture, right? Like you're taking risk of your life. So that is how we justify property, like mixing of your labor with unowned resources. And we talk about appropriation, like the first use appropriation, like if there is an unclaimed good, you appropriate it and put it into some use for consumption or something. Then you come to own that particular resource. So we have a homesteading principle where we talk about material goods. Then we have an IP kind of thing, the contract theory in libertarianism, which is again a natural theory. Like if you have promised some services to certain person using to some other individual using a contract, then you have to honor that contract. And we use this we validate this kind of arguments of contract, that you are entering a contract out of your free will. You're not forced to sign a contract or promise something. So the concept of fraud, and with non-material goods, the contract theory comes in, and fraud comes in, like not honoring the contract. Exit of contract comes in, the dispute of such services which you have promised. So basically these are the theories. The third theory that the libertarians which we practice is with market economics, where you have the government regulation. So we talk about why the government should not interfere in our goods, why certain goods, the part of the earnings that we have to pay as taxes, which we are forced to, because if we are not paying it, the government is going to confiscate our goods, which it has no rights to do so. So these are the certain things that in libertarian theory that we talk about. We talk about jurisprudence, like what justice is, what laws are good laws and bad laws, what natural laws are, what positive laws are. We talk about right to life. We talk about positive rights and negative rights. Basically, like positive rights are man-made laws, which says that a person has a right to education, or let's say right to drinking water, but it does not define who is going to provide those things. Is the individual himself supposed to provide all these goods, or will he have a contract with some agency which is going to do that for him? Negative liberties: you do not have a right to destroy my property, you do not have a right to murder me. So we libertarians work in this foundations which we derive, which we reason, which we justify, why this particular thing should be followed, what are the benefits of it, and what are the disadvantages of it. As you mentioned about the pure libertarians and the non-pure libertarians, there is a problem in society that you always have a conflict over property, right? Like what I own and what I have transformed is also viewed by some other person who is jealous or envious, or who wants this resource for a purpose which is not compatible or suitable with my purpose, right? Like for example, there is an apple which I want to eat, and he wants to eat, but unfortunately I am the person who had grown the apple, or maybe I have gathered the apple from somewhere, which I went for a searching for apples, and I collected certain apples. Now there are people who would be desiring those resources for their own consumption without putting in the appropriate efforts. So they come up with this kind of ideologies where they say that now you have more apples than what you can consume, so you need to part with whatever is excessive for you. They do not regard that if they do so, the next day I'm not going to gather more apples than necessary, or I'm not going to grow more than what is sufficient for me. And it also neglects the part that we are not talking about the present, but we also require to preserve some wealth for the future, right? If tomorrow I may not be able to find any apples, it might be the winter season, so we need to save goods as well, right? Every individual has different needs. He wants to innovate, he wants to you know put those goods into excessive goods into other use, maybe conduct some experiments to find out like make apple juice or something, or some kind of a medicine out of apple extract. We do not know, so there is no point or no way that the other person should curb this kind of individual freedom. It can have disastrous outcomes. So this is what libertarian theory that we deal with, and these are the problems that we face.
So again, just to recap a little bit, uh, without property rights, it is not possible to identify who's the aggressor and who's the victim, and we cannot identify who's the actual owner of the good, whether it is naturally occurring in nature or if it is a transformed good from nature.
Right.
I think if you ask, almost anyone would reply to this question in the affirmative. Suppose you ask them that, will you choose to, I mean, would you respect the property rights of other individuals? Almost, I don't think there'll be anyone who would willingly want to say, uh, I mean, honestly, would say no. I mean, I think most people would say, of course, we would support it, because if they said no, it would be like, for example, say if I have, as you said, an apple, example of an apple. So suppose, say, if you were just roaming around in the countryside and you found an apple tree, uh, and you did not see that anyone actually owns that apple tree, and you just decide to pluck the apple, right?
Hmm.
And if I'm passing by and I see that you're eating an apple, and then I decide to ask you to give it to me, it is only legitimate that if you willingly share the apple with me, or if you give me the whole apple, one unit as it is to me, then it is fine. That is a trade, right? So that is, some people would call it charity, but it's still a legitimate transfer of property. So what you owned previously, you willingly transfer the ownership to me. That is fine, and I think almost everyone would agree that this is moral and ethical, and this is a valid, reasonable occurrence. This happens every day, because we see on a daily basis that millions of people worldwide, billions of people worldwide, they talk to each other without being forced to talk to each other. Millions of people trade worldwide, trade goods and services, right? Especially if you take the internet, there are lots of people who sell goods and services to one another, regardless of where they live. And this is something which is very natural. Most people would accept and would say, yes, I mean, what's the big deal, right? So this is what we are used to. This is what we know. Nothing wrong with it.
Hmm.
However, people would start making exceptions when it comes to things like providing infrastructure such as roads and water supply, power supply, and whatnot. They would say, no, we need another agency which can ensure there is equal distribution of natural resources. They want to ensure some sort of just distribution of resources which are so-called essential for survival. And
Right.
99% of the time, this would be the government. So people would suddenly switch away from their natural condition of free trade and voluntary transaction to a coerced state of transaction and distribution. And
Right.
libertarians who support such a thing, as you mentioned about taxation, so taxation is theft, because this is not a voluntary payment for services provided by the government, because after all, government is a territorial monopoly. So there is no question that taxation is all voluntary. Now, even if someone claims the taxation is voluntary, that is, they pay taxes because they want the good roads and power supply and water supply and whatnot. The question is, you can't support a system of forced redistribution and claim that just because I, as one person, voluntarily support it, that it becomes just. It cannot be, because it's a system of coercion which basically steals from millions of productive individuals. And the proof that taxation is a theft and that it is not a voluntary payment is, you can see that how many people, the number of people worldwide, regardless of where you live and how much you make in terms of monthly income, almost every individual would want to try and save from paying taxes, right? So ideally, people would say, of course, I do not want to pay income tax. But then they would say, no, but I need to pay tax because otherwise I will not get good roads and power supply and water supply. But we know that is false, because suppose I switch the argument to say, for example, who will build the iPhone, or who will build the Nexus, the next smartphone? People would say, okay, we already have big brands like Samsung, Apple, and whatnot, Nokia building great phones. And similarly, who would provide you with, say, a food produce? I mean, obviously, you have farmers and you have traders who ensure that you get the agricultural produce. So there is no question that we need to have government involved in every single little supply of goods and services to satisfy certain demands. So people should learn to identify this contradiction, that whereas when it comes to so many things they own and they trade in the market, they're okay with voluntary transactions, but when it comes to certain other goods and services, they're sort of signing off and putting an stamp to it and saying, yes, this is okay, in spite of it being a coercive distribution system. So, again, coming back to social justice part, the libertarians who think that again libertarianism is not complete, you need to add to NAP and things like social justice and sort of uh, curry favor with the left on these issues. I think it's completely wrong, because the once we start going down that path, we end up not being libertarians, and we just end up being like any other leftist liberal, right?
Exactly. See, you destroy and distort the society itself, right? Like the problem is if you notice, the leftists, they do not have a proper even these thick libertarians, they do not have a proper economic theory to back their claims, right? We are all governed by an economic law. The first thing is that there is always a minimum quantity of goods available, so we have to economize, right? These are economic good where we don't have this good in abundant supply to satisfy all the needs of human beings, right? And the other thing that they forget, that even if I take an example of a bread, let's say bread, right? So bread, people go and buy it. It's a consumer product, so people go and buy it from the retail shop, but they forget the entire process, right? The bread does not fall from the sky. You have to manufacture bread, so it takes a land, it will take tools and machinery, it will take a period of time for the wheat to grow. There has to you have to mill it using a milling machine, and then you have to transport it to your home from the field. So there are a lot many skills involved in each and every production stage, and there are different people involved. So now if you just want to take away, you want to eat bread or anything, you want the government to supply bread for free of cost, or instantly everyone should have bread, you're actually negating, like you are not even bothering to find out like how many people are involved, what is the process, or do they have the required skill to grow that much amount of wheat, what are the challenges that they are facing. We do not have any kind of idea about what is going on in the background. What we know is that what we demand is that we need free bread, right? Everybody should have a right to food. So this is absurd, right? You have to come into terms like how many goods are available and when the other goods will be available. So human beings, I mean, we have to prioritize like whatever immediate needs are, and we have to use those goods for our immediate use instead of demanding like an infinite supply of goods, which is impossible. So they have to realize that this is the first governing law of economics, which they tend to forget when they are building their theories or making their arguments.
I think you brought up a very important point, and that is the existence of scarcity. There's a scarcity of not only of natural resources, but there's also scarcity of time. This time is also a resource. So, as you rightly pointed out, yes, to produce any good, you need to use certain resources which occur naturally and certain resources which need to be man-made, and you need to use certain tools. Obviously you need time, you need labor, and you need to transform all these things together, put together into a finished good. And as you said, uh, bread is a very simple example of consumer good, and people, those who actually claim that government should provide, say, bread at a price that is below the market price, or provided for completely free, there is no cost to the consumer, and that would
That's
lead
that's
to.
a demand, right? But
Yeah,
if you look at economics, it's a demand. Now, demand will need a supply, right? So if you do not have the goods to supply, no matter what you're demanding, you're not going
correct.
to get that goods, right? So that is the
That is
practical
true.
thing.
That is true. No, but even if you take the case, say for example, tomorrow by law, government decrees that all production of bread will be done only by the government, and then they would provide bread at say 1 rupee per loaf, right?
Correct.
What will happen is, as you rightly mentioned, since people are not aware of the actual production factors and the actual process, most people will willingly support this because they'll say, "Hey, finally I can get bread for 1 rupee," whereas I used to pay 30 rupees. So obviously people will recalculate and say, "Okay, I can save on 29 rupees, whatever." So uh, since that's the case, the government will start producing bread at 1 rupee, but the simple fact is that the naturally occurring scarcity of resources that go into making of bread, whether it's time, labor, and other resources, that scarcity has not gone away, right? So that cost of managing the scarcity is still there. It's just that the
Right.
government is trying to put a blanket over it and say there is no real scarcity, and they're trying to artificially suppress it. So what would really happen is that the price of bread, the real market price of bread, would be rapidly going up in spite of government just selling it 1 rupee in their shops. So what would happen is that at the end of say 1 year, bread would become extremely scarce because the resources required to manufacture bread would become so expensive that government will, in the end, will have to either stop the production of bread or will essentially have to liberalize the production of bread. And I'm saying liberalize in air quotes because the so-called liberalization of the Indian economy in 1990, 1991, 92 is essentially the same thing. That is, the government claims to let go of the control of production, but what they actually they do is, even though the direct control of production has been sort of abolished, but they still intervene in the factors of production through certain regulations and rules. And as you rightly mentioned, many of these fake libertarians are interested in policy making, especially, are into this kind of sort of efficient, making the regulations more efficient so as to reduce the intervention of government into production. But the fact of the matter is that you cannot have a giant monopoly uh, continuing across time and then claim that we'll somehow reduce the effect of the monopoly on the people, and on goods. It's not possible. So, yes, you may have a few victories here and there by trying to get new laws, old laws abolished, but the fact is that we cannot have these monopolistic agencies and then assume and then be sure that we can somehow reduce their negative effects. It is not possible. So I think the logical conclusion of libertarianism, if you apply it consistently, would be that libertarians should also reject the state, or reject government outright. That means we do not support the idea of government anywhere. It's not just in India or the US or Germany, it means anywhere, right? Because we know for a fact by logical deduction and also through experience and historical evidence that the idea of keeping a government efficient and trying to ensure that government can produce social justice and equal and free society is completely absurd, because it is the government or the state which is the biggest violator of property rights, the biggest violator of liberty. So there is no question of the government actually helping us be more free or make us more prosperous.
See, the problem is actually again the lack of economics, right? I mean, you have this. We have two kinds of libertarians, right? First is the anarchist, and the second people are the statist.
Right.
The justification of state, or why most people think that they require the state, is as soon as you prepare some kind of a property, you have a problem that somebody is going to steal it, right? Somebody is going to aggress upon you for the valuable good or the economic good that you have, which are the scarce good, which other people also need for their own consumption. So there is a need for an agency for protection, right? Somebody should protect this. The
Hmm.
problem is that they keep a monopolistic agency, the state, and they think that the state is going to protect them. But unfortunately, as soon as you give a monopoly power to any agency or any individual, is going to misuse that power, right? So he is going to distort he is going to impose taxes. Let's say, like, you have to give us 30% share for this people, or maybe he is going to impose a law that you all are consuming a lot of bread since I made bread cheaper. You all are very greedy, so from tomorrow we are going to have ration. You are only going to get 4 loaves a day. So these are the problems, right, with the government. Like, you can have any kind of absurd regulation. The other thing is that they will be consuming as much bread as they want, because they would be claiming that they are a welfare institution, and they are doing good for the society. Without them, the society cannot excuse. Under that pretense, they can conduct any kind of expenses to please people. They might take bread or wheat from one part of the country and give it to other people who might not even eat bread, but just because they're getting it for free, they will vote for that particular politician. So this government, what the problem is that we do not say that protection agencies are not required. The anarchists, basically, they say that the monopoly of power is a bad thing. Even the libertarian statists, they say that there are three rules for government, and rest of the things should be managed by the market. There are certain libertarians, like, who will be against price fixing but will be okay for subsidies. So even subsidies create a different kind of problem, right? Every action has an effect. So you have to literally look into like what they're doing. So the policymakers, basically what they do is they will try to do some farmer welfare and remove the price fixing, but that farmer welfare is going to, like, they will say give them crop failure insurance. Now crop failure insurance, they will not take care of the crops, right? And now you will have pretty frequent crop failures, and the government is always
I think,
going to.
just to interrupt you, Mithun, this is actually a very interesting topic, and I think we can keep this for the next podcast
Correct.
regarding the idea of subsidies and support systems. So it's fine. I think, as rightly pointed out, one of the things what happens with government control of resources and government trying to satisfy so-called market demand is that it actually distorts the sort of the natural order of the market when it comes to production and consumption and management of the resources. So as you said that, for example, government will say that, okay, yes, we have population of 2 billion, 1.3 billion. We need to ensure that each and every one gets one loaf of bread per day. Now, this obviously, it's quite obvious that not everyone will consume one loaf of bread per day or consume even one loaf of bread in a month, right? And
Right.
people who would never want to consume bread, say, more than twice a year, right? So one thing is, of course, in India, culturally, we are more used to consuming rice and rice-based and products and wheat-based products, which are not really oriented towards bread. So if government tries to force this onto people, yes, what you would get is you would get people who consume a lot of bread. They would start consuming even more than they normally would, and that would create a new problem for the government. That is, the government would find that sort of they have to force, as you mentioned, rationing, because to ensure sort of equal distribution and sort of this is what they call economic justice, right? So we know for a fact that government control via price controls, government control of production, government control, sorry, I would say rather regulation of the production factors, government control of resources, government regulation of resources, essentially distorts what we call the market process. So even though people may not be consciously aware of it, but if you actually sort of work it out using logical deduction, not necessarily through empirical, sort of reasoning, but rather through logical reasoning, we would find that any sort of monopoly, especially government monopoly over resources or people, we realize that it will lead to higher prices and lower quality. So I think as you rightly mentioned, that there are many libertarians who are sort of fascinated with the idea of policy making, and it sort of dilutes the message of liberty, and pushes people into a wrong direction, into thinking and accepting the idea that yes, we would accept coercion in certain areas of our life, and we would accept voluntary transaction in certain areas of our life. So I think when it comes to being a libertarian, being consistent is important. That is, sticking to the non-aggression principle, sticking to the idea of property rights is important. And I think, Mithun, do you have anything to add for now?
Yeah, I mean, the last thing is the free market, right? That is the economic part. Like they have to understand economics and the consequences of everything. Even the minarchist who says that police, courts, and military is needed, they also have to think on terms like how many policemen will be employed, how much should be the production of the production services basically. So even that is taxing on the people, right? I mean, it is going to have its effect on the economic, on the production, even if it is directly not visible, right? So those things, this libertarians have to think, and if they have to take a proper stand, they cannot go by the ideological concept that minarchism means the government only has three roles. But why those three roles? How big are this each individual roles? They have to come up with answers. So I don't think that libertarianism is possible without an anarchic total market phenomenon. I mean, that is the only way a true libertarian theory can survive and a true libertarian will be.
Yeah, I think that's correct. So consistency is important, and I think just brought up another topic of libertarian anarchists versus libertarian monarchists.
Yeah, there is so much to discuss, right? We will do it in other podcasts as well.
Obvious. There are lots of things discussed there. I mean, especially things like national defense and the law system.
Right, right.
I think, okay, guys. So for now, we'll end this podcast, and I think this has been a good podcast so far. We'll see you guys next time. See you, Matan.
Thanks, Srinivas. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Bye.